Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the Global ESCO Network's webinar on India's ESCO market beyond cherry picking. We have Aarti Nain with us today, who's an advisor with India's UNEP urban cooling program. She's waiting in the waiting area just with her presentation ready to go. If you allow me just a few minutes for introduction and a bit of housekeeping, Aarti will take over shortly. My name is Søren Lütken. I'm the chairman of the Global ESCO Network, which is hosted by UNEP's Copenhagen Climate Center. So we're broadcasting from Copenhagen right now. The Global ESCO Network works for the integrated use of the ESCO industry as an implementation partner for energy efficiency. And the whole motivation for that is climate change, as we are hosted here in the Copenhagen Climate Change Center. The mission of the Global ESCO Network is to add and to reinforce existing efforts of national ESCO associations to promote increased activities by the ESCO industry at a global scale. And we do that through different means. And one of the means that we have had quite a bit of success with is our series of webinars. We are covering about 90% of all ESCO associations on the planet. We have 35 partners, and we are guided by an advisory board of 7 people, which provides assistance for our day-to-day work and publications and policy advice that we're bringing across. We have had quite a few webinars over the years, some of which are focused also on presentations of national ESCO frameworks or policy frameworks, regulatory frameworks. Today we're adding India to the 6 countries that are already covered. You will be able to find those national ESCO market presentations in our library on our website, the globalesconetwork.org. So you're always welcome to find our past webinars there on, of course, on the markets, but also on other topics related to ESCOs. We are planning a series again to add to the country coverage of our webinars in the next season, so next year. So stay tuned for further market presentations for ESCOs. The topic today touches on cherry picking, and it's a bit, well, to some extent, a bit controversial, because there's always a discussion whether the good should be the enemy of the perfect. And when we say cherry picking, it mainly refers to the fact that in many cases energy efficiency interventions are done with single technology solutions, not by ESCOs, commonly at least, but by national programs that support different energy efficiency technologies, or indeed suppliers of single technology solutions to improve energy efficiency. Of course, it's better, at least in most cases, it's better that you do something rather than nothing. So that's why we also here internally have this discussion on what is cherry picking not good in some cases, where you take the one technology that really makes a difference and leave the rest behind. We find, though, that the most professional approach is a systems approach, which ESCOs are normally taking, and I'm sure that is also what Aarti is going to present in her market overview for ESCOs in India, where, of course, we've seen the EESL, the Energy Efficiency Services Limited in India, having great success in rolling out large-scale energy efficiency programs. But there's also other parts of the ESCO market in India, and I'm sure that is what Aarti is going to present about as well. So before much further ado, I will hand over to Aarti just one piece of housekeeping, which is that we welcome your questions throughout the presentation. Just type them in. There's a panel or a banner somewhere on the screen. I can't see exactly where it is on my screen. So to type in the questions, we will collect them here, and we will present the questions to Aarti once her presentation is over. So without further ado, Aarti, please take over.
Thank you so much, Søren, for the introduction and for also introducing the topic. And I do hope that this webinar would add some meaningful insights about India to the library that already exists and that you mentioned. So I'm going to switch to my presentation and run along with that. Thank you. So just to reiterate what Søren had said, I'm an energy efficiency specialist operating primarily in India, but I do have worked in ESCO sector in Middle East also, that's including Jordan, and also in the US for some years. So the outline for the webinar today would be that I will run through the legal frameworks for the ESCO sector in India that have been established since 2001, but mainly came into being from 2009 onwards. Then we are going to look at the quality assurance practices, that is the licensing and accreditation systems in India for ESCOs, the key drivers for the ESCO sector in India, along with, and then finally at the trends and the challenges that the sector faces. Just to give you an overview on the energy efficiency sector in India, there are multiple estimates that exist, but the most reliable probably could be the World Bank one, which suggests that the energy efficiency market opportunity in India is around 150 billion US dollars, and one could end up saving around 184 to 185 billion units of electricity annually. Now, the Central Electricity Authority of India, which is the key regulator of the central government, their data suggests, and the trends have been static for some time now, that buildings, industrial, agriculture are some of the largest, along with transport, are some of the largest consumers of electricity in the country. In 2001, the Energy Conservation Act was passed, and all policies at central and state level are under the umbrella of this one act. It had been recently amended in 2022 to increase its scope and mandate, especially to non-commercial, I would say, residential energy users. The ESCO sector in India basically started on full scale, on a larger scale in about 2009. But the first ESCO, if I'm correct, was probably registered in the late 90s or early part 2000. But it is in 2009 that we saw a proliferation of ESCOs. Right now, there are about 150 registered ESCOs in the country. Most of these are vendor ESCOs. So basically, the manufacturer, not that could be Carrier, that could be Schneider. They have become ESCOs, and they also operate in other countries, in Europe, in North America, South America, and other parts of the world. So we have both national and multinational entities. Usually the larger ESCOs, which have a turnover of more than about 0.2 million USD per year, are typically vendor ESCOs and multinational entities. The largest ticket size of in an individual project probably maxes out at about 300,000 USD. And if my statistics, are accurate and up to date, then about most of the ESCOs are smaller ones, and these are like less than 25 employees. The scope of technologies, and that is where we are coming at cherry picking. So if you look at the graph on the right hand side, lighting, small electrical equipment, which could be motors, pumps, and HVAC retrofits are the most applied measures, but that doesn't mean that others are ignored altogether. It is because of probably longer paybacks that envelopes and power distribution systems and others might be ignored, and also the fact, which I'll come to again later in my presentation, is that buildings have still not been touched by the ESCO model, not much. So that is also a factor here. Now, how is energy service company in India defined as it is applied, and there's no formula, is the design and implement energy saving solutions after identifying the measures through audits. They may finance the upfront cost, because in India, Accessing finance is not easy, so it is not always the case that financing is applied by the ESCOs unless and until it's a super ESCO like Energy Efficiency Services Limited. Coming back to that Umbrella Act, which is the Energy Conservation Act, it is the primary legal framework for the ESCO market to operate in India, because it mandates energy audits for designated consumers, which are actually very highly intensive energy users. And these designated consumers can get energy audits and retrofits or energy efficiency measures implemented only through accredited energy auditors. It is mandatory for the designated consumers to use these ESCOs to develop their baselines for energy audits and follow through the energy use targets that are being set by the central government. Now, the central government, which oversees the agency which oversees energy conservation is the Ministry of Power and the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So these audit baselines and the energy use targets are established by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and I'll go through the policies which allow them to do so. Before that, the quality assurance system for ESCOs was launched in about 2009 or 8 by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. It's a 5-scale system, grade 1 to 5, and B is allowed through the Energy Conservation Act to specify the certification procedures and to maintain a registry of auditors. This accreditation is important and mandatory for ESCOs. It is usually managed in India through third-party agencies like RUSL, ICRA, and CARE. The grading criteria has 3 key components. One is the business risk, which is the track record of and the market position of the ESCO, which has the maximum weightage of 40% in the score. It is the number of projects, industries that have been completed, the savings achieved, and what is the kind of pipeline that is available for the ESCO. Then the financial solvency and flexibility, basically their cash flows, turnovers, what is their debt structure, accruals and receivables management. And finally, the organizational stability, which includes the kind of technical expertise they have and their management structure and quality assurance systems. Now, the accreditation is managed, if you look at it, the qualification of having BE accredited and certified auditors is very critical. And this is also managed by BE, so it conducts a biannual certification examination where certified energy managers and auditors are accredited. And once those who have the experience in actual auditing and retrofits can then apply to a committee constituted by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. And if they are approved by the committee, then only they can become auditors. And it is necessary to have at least one such auditor in an ESCO. So far, BE has certified about 14,000 odd managers and auditors and about 200 auditors, which kind of gels with the fact that there are about 150 ESCOs. These are the trends since 2009 when this scheme started, and if you'll notice, there was this huge jump in the number of ESCOs from 2009 to 2011. And since then, the growth in the number of ESCOs, and especially the graded ones, has been moderate. Right now, we're at a number of 150 or so. Now, coming to the policy drivers and the market drivers for the ESCO market, there are 2 key ones. One is the Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme. Other is the ESL as a super ESCO. And lastly, which is not really living up to its potential right now, but does have potential in the future, is the Building Energy Star Rating system. The Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme primarily targets the industrial sector, though in the recent cycles in the last 4 or 5 years, they have also included utilities, big public sector agencies like the Indian Railways, and also energy-intensive commercial end users like hotels and healthcare. ESL has looked at a mix. It has looked at agriculture, it has looked at buildings, it has also looked at industries. And the star rating system is specifically for both residential and non-residential buildings. Out of these, Perform, Achieve and Trade is the only scheme which is a mandatory one. The Energy Star Rating system is not so. It's a market-oriented regulation. What it does is with public agencies, which are Central Electricity Regulatory Commission and the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, that's BEE, for each particular sector and designated consumer, it sets the consumption norms and standards of savings. The consumers are expected to get the audits and the EE measures implemented to meet their targets. If they're able to achieve more than what the target has been set, they're allocated saleable energy saving certificates, which they can trade on 3 trading platforms that exist right now, which is Indian Energy Exchange Limited, Power Exchange India Limited, and the Hindustan Power Exchange Limited. And the consumers which have not been able to meet the targets set for them by BE under the PAT cycle can buy them from there. Since 2012, there have been 7 PAT cycles. Now there are about 1,200 designated consumers, which are listed by BE, which have to participate in the PAT scheme. Roughly 10 billion USD have been invested by these designated consumers in energy efficiency through ESCOs, and a saving of around about 24 million tons of equivalent of oil have been saved. Now, if we look at the cycles 1 and 2, and we have the results from 2 only because 3 is still being analyzed, and we do not have the summary of that. There has been a growth. So in cycle 1, there were just 8 sectors, which are primarily industrial sectors like chemicals, pulp, paper, textile, refineries, and so on and so forth, aluminium, cement. It is on the cycle 3rd that they added a few more, like discoms, transport, railways, and commercial. If you look at the stats, there has been an increase, obviously, in the number of energy saving certificates that have been issued. It increased from 3.8 million to about 5.7 million, and also there has been an corresponding increase in the number of designated consumers. So right now we have 11 sectors which are for whom it's mandatory to implement energy efficiency measures. This is a picture from this last year, not last, but the present year, 2023, which looks at the trading that is going on ESCOs. And the highest that has been touched is about 300,000 certificates traded. So the trading happens typically once a week, probably on Tuesdays. And the pricing this year has hovered around $22 US per certificate, and one certificate is almost equivalent to 1 metric ton of oil. So that is on one of the drivers, PAT scheme, and the second driver has been the Energy Efficiency Services Limited, a very different model. This is a public sector company established by the Ministry of Power in 2009. ESL follows a slightly different approach. It takes all the projects under its own belt and combines the model of bulk procurement with ESCOs to drive its agenda. It also gets a lot of investment from multinational agencies. The modus operandi typically is that it picks up a technology, kind of cherry picking, where it sees there's a maximum potential of scaling up for it, and it aggregates the demand from the end users, creates standard energy performance contracts, and purchases, or rather bulk procures this particular technology and applies it. It has mostly operated with public sector institutions and not so much with private sector end users. But it has dabbled across a multiplicity of end users. These are public buildings, retrofits. They have also looked at multiple technologies like the super efficient air conditioning program, efficiency programs for MSMEs, agriculture pump sets, municipal street lighting, lighting, which has been one of its most successful programs, which is the LED bulb program. And more recently, they have tried more complex typologies like resilient buildings that are resilient to epidemics like COVID as well. I'll take a little bit of a deep dive into two particular programs where they operated at scale, which were slightly complex than just applying one technology, or the technology itself was complex. So one is the Building Energy Efficiency Program, where they did a simple retrofit around three technologies, which is lighting, cooling through fans, and cooling through air conditioners. They applied it in around, the estimate is about 10,000 buildings, and invested about 42 million USD in that. Now, I was a part of these programs, and from my experience, I can tell that one of the major problems is applying a standardized contract, and also in payment recovery, and also in deployment. Because when you're operating at such a scale, quite often the quality, maintaining the quality of the product is not so easy when you're looking at 10,000 buildings and probably millions of appliances being installed in a span of 1 to 3 years. So that was one of the key issues, and also the payment recovery, because even at EESL, the measurement and verification was not robust. There were very few metering or measurement and verification instruments applied or installed in sites. So there was always a problem in recovering the investment, even though they had flat EMI kind of structure in their contracts. They faced a similar issue with the super efficient AC program as well, where they were replacing split and window air conditioners with inverter technology. And these were green ACs. The success that they had was mostly with ATMs in the banking sector and with some public buildings. Now, the challenges for ESCOs typically have been, not just for ESL, but for all ESCOs, has typically been investment recovery. And there are a variety of factors for that. One is a lack of accurate M&V. Clients sometimes expect a more thorough measurement and verification, which is expensive, and they're unwilling to pay the cost for it. But when it comes to the payback and paying back the ESCO, it leads to disputes. Also, the contracts can be pretty complex, both because of the way an ESCO operates and also because of client demands. Smaller ESCOs definitely face a problem in accessing project financing. The ticket size is small. The banks do not want to operate in those margins. Also, this is a cash flow based financing rather than an asset based financing, and banking sector is still not conversant with that. And the risk guarantees are simply not there. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to showcase some of the risk guarantee mechanisms which have been introduced, but they are hardly a drop in the ocean given the scale of sector, the one that it could reach. There's also an inadequate demand. So PAT scheme is the only one which mandates energy efficiency. Other schemes are mostly voluntary schemes. Even when there's a big push from the government, even for the public sector, to adopt energy efficiency measures through super ESCOs like Energy Efficiency Services Limited, the procurement systems in India are quite complicated, and each organization, despite a lot of effort at standardization, has not been able to adopt standard procurement systems, and that is why it is also difficult for ESCOs to work in the sector. Payback expectations are very aggressive. Typically, it's about 3 years, 3 to 5 years is the average, but there are clients who expect the payback to be less than 1 year or 1.5 years, which is not always possible, especially if you are looking at deeper retrofits like that of the envelope and other things. And E is, energy efficiency by itself is a low priority within the investment making structure in India for all entities, whether they are from the industrial sector or from residential. Now, risk guarantees, as I had mentioned, is a bit of a challenge for ESCOs because they don't have it, not just commercial risks, but even to cover the technical risks. So World Bank and GEF had established such a facility with SIDBI, which is an industrial bank, a state-owned industrial bank in the country. And some of the largest commercial banks partnered with SIDBI. That included the State Bank of India, which is the largest national bank, ICICI, which is the largest private sector bank, one of the largest private sector banks. They set up a line of credit, risk guarantees were given to these banks to then in turn lend to both ESCOs and project owners. And these project owners were typically municipal building owners or municipal asset owners to invest in energy efficiency through ESCOs. The target has been about 100 million USD, but I think about only 53%, $53 million or something like that has been disbursed. There were two other facilities, similar facilities, that were set up directly with Bureau of Energy Efficiency instead of a bank like SIDBI, and they have not been so successful. The demand drivers, and where, based on my knowledge and experience in working in this sector, some of the ESCOs who understand their business and are willing to innovate are now switching towards everything as a service. Now that could be cooling as a service, gas or energy as a service, which Schneider has started doing, and cooling as a service, which I believe an ESCO called Smart Juice has started implementing. Because they are the key service provider, it gives them a greater decision-making power over not only the efficiencies that could be implemented, but also how to implement, how to execute the project and how to manage it as well. So that gives them an edge in not only investing in the best possible efficient technology, but also in managing and operating it as required. But once again, this is just very few players in the sector who are trying this. More are expected to come through on this. Also, certain new technologies, and not just singular technologies, but application as a set of solutions is being tried and tested, including with ESL. There have been pilots now on net zero energy buildings through ESCO models, heat pump deployment in colder regions in public buildings, and also these new technologies the application is being tried to the ESCO model, and there are positive developments there. Now, the star labeling program, if it is scaled up, has great potential. Also, the green credit program, which has been launched this year by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Sustainable buildings is one of the key sectors where one could gain green credits, and these are tradable green credits similar to the PAT scheme, but these are not only in sustainable buildings but sustainable products also, so that probably opens up the market for ESCOs in the coming years. Also, multi-development agencies, multilateral agencies, and the government is pushing for adoption of decarbonization charters by the private sector in India. That includes building sector developers, large private sector companies, service-based companies also, to adopt these decarbonization charters, which across the value chain of their operations. So that also opens up possibilities in addition to much larger scale of adoption of environmental safeguards by agencies in India, private sector and public sector. Green buildings have been a source of revenue for the ESCO market, but the share of green buildings in India presently is about 2 to 5%, and very few of them are existing buildings. But that number is expected to grow because a lot of cities and state governments in India are offering additional built-up floor space to developers if they go green and get themselves certified under any of the 3 to 4 certification systems operating in India. These include LEED, USGBC LEED, GREHA, which is indigenous system, and also IGBC, So that could also become a driver for ESCO sector in India. If one looks at 3 or 4 policies that are kind of pushing the ESCO sector, one of the major sectors that has been ignored so far, and if you remember the first chart, is that domestic end use is one of the biggest electricity consumers in the country, something around 30% probably. None of the policies right now is targeting that end use, which is the domestic sector end use, and there have been energy codes which have been introduced for residential building, but the implementation is at the state level, and the states will take some time to implement it, if at all. And that also, one is not sure if the implementation and enforcement would be mandatory or voluntary. If it is mandatory, there is scope for ESCOs to grow and operate in India and widen their services. But if the residential energy code also continues to be voluntary, then there's not much scope for ESCOs in the residential sector as well. I think that with that I come to the end of my presentation.
Many thanks, Aarti, for this excellent presentation of Indian market. I think there's a number of instruments here that are unique compared to other markets also. One thing is that EESL has been a pioneer in driving large-scale rollout of energy efficiency investments. But the PAT scheme also seems to be unique in its approach to mandating energy efficiency investments in industry. As I mentioned before, please, participants, put your questions to Aarti in our comments system. I have a couple of questions already, so I will simply present the questions here to Aarti, but don't hold back your questions. We still have space and quite a bit of time to fill with your questions. So Aarti, I have here a question on the accreditation scheme. And we in the Global ESCO Network also recommend that countries actually set up accreditation schemes to make sure that the ESCO industry performs at a higher standard. I could see you had 3 different gradings of ESCOs, but the question here is in fact more on how do you make sure that ESCOs are actually being graded by their clients, and that there's a balance between good and bad gradings. How is that ensured?
So that the client perspective is factored and reflected in the grading system in the forms that the ESCOs have to submit to grade or to gain or renew their accreditation. I think about 2 to 3 of their clients are expected to send independent recommendations to the committee that is constituted by Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So that is one way where you hear directly from the clients, but also one of the criteria is the energy savings that have been achieved, the track record of the ESCO. That is typically tracked for the preceding 3 years, and that kind of also helps to understand how the ESCO has performed.
So you need 3 independent or individual ratings by clients for rating an ESCO.
Yeah, it's subjective in India. Like in US, I think it's very objective. But this is more like of an essay that how was the experience? Did they deliver on time? What the savings achieved, the savings that were promised achieved? If not, then whose fault was it? Was it ESCO's fault? So it's more subjective in that sense.
Okay, and this question is sent out by the administrator of the accreditation scheme.
Sorry, I did not understand that question.
Is it questions sent out by the host or the administrator of the accreditation scheme?
Yes, so they are in the form, but it is to be inserted with the main application by the ESCO. It is to be inserted within that, but it is to be responded. The response has to be from the client. So yes, in that sense, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency directly asks.
Okay. Good.
But
Yes, yeah.
Goes to the client to actually check whether you are the one who responded, and is that kind of check doesn't happen.
Okay. Another question concerns the PAT scheme. So what are the thresholds defined for compulsory investments under the PAT?
So it's different for different sectors. So there are these 8 sectors. The baseline has been evolved for all of these sectors, and the designated consumers within each of these sectors, the baselines have been set and their targets are set. What has moved across the 7 cycles is that the targets have also been moved, because what you achieve in cycle 1, then they look at the next level of performance in cycle 2, and so on and so forth. So there has been an expansion on that. But now the feeling is that this level of, this generation of technologies has more or less been exhausted, and I think PAT will have to look at a deeper level of efficiency within the existing technologies, or bring even more technologies or options for energy efficiency within its scope to have a similar impact that it's had so far.
Right. So is there a gradual tightening of the scheme?
It has been. There has been a gradual tightening.
So the thresholds are moved, or how does it work?
It moves for the consumer, the designated consumer. So because the baseline moves, the baseline is set for 1 year, and then in the next 3 years you have to achieve the target vis-a-vis that, and it's normalized for the sector. Once you have achieved that, then they have in certain cases looked at the next level of targets that could be achieved.
Okay. I think from our perspective now, being the global ESCO network here, we would actually be interested in seeing the numbers. How does it work in practice? Because we find it a unique example of a way to manage or impose energy efficiency investments in industry. But we can have that separately. There are other questions here, in fact, also regarding the PAT, and maybe it goes exactly on this discussion here. How do you see the PAT expanded in order to scale up demand?
So the PAT, one way is that they are moving to additional sectors. In the first 2 cycles, they were predominantly looking at energy-intensive industries, which is aluminium, cement, steel, textiles, chemicals, and I think there were 8 or 7 of them. Then they opened up they expanded to include railways, which is one of the largest energy consumers, if not per capita, but otherwise. They have started looking at DISCOMs, and now they've started looking at commercial buildings, the first of which has been hotels. And now there are discussions on whether we can expand it to other energy intensive users within the building sector and transportation and so on and so forth. So there is an expansion, there's scope of expansion in terms of the typology of the end use, which can be increased, and then there is also the targets, because if the thing is that if you have to achieve net zero emissions, which is a target that has been set for India to be net zero by 2070, then not only more end users have to be included in the PAT scheme, but also we have to look at more options and avenues for energy efficiency.
Are there any visible trends for ESCO projects looking at multiple types of technologies as a service in the same project? For instance, energy management, efficient cooling, solar PV, and EV charging in the same project?
Yes, but those have been more like pilots, and by all people by ESL, there have been pilots where they have looked at these holistic solutions in the same project. Bringing in solar PV, bringing in EV, both charging and vehicles, and also looking at other efficiency solutions. But I think there hardly been one or two, and one of the reasons is that again it is the vendor ESCOs who are thriving to the extent that one can thrive right now in the sector in India, and it is a challenging sector. But then vendor ESCOs are typically, as I said, manufacturers. So then Schneider would probably be looking more at automation, and it might go into one or two other service areas, but it's not easy for it to go into every service area or every solution of energy efficiency. So that's the drawback. But not ESCOs, but other companies strangely are trying to do that, apply both renewables and cooling and any other efficiency solution in projects.
Okay. Are there any efficiency requirements demanded from the hospitality sector? Hotels, for instance.
Yes, they're part of the star labeling scheme in India. Not under the PAT scheme so far, but as there's talk about that. So they are under the star labeling scheme where they have to disclose their energy use and try to attain the best possible savings. There are other programs which are voluntary ones and actually being pushed by the hospitality industry themselves to become sustainable and eco-friendly, because there is now a niche market for this to be sustainable and eco-friendly. Other than that, no national level scheme particularly targeting the hospitality sector as of now.
Right. Question here says, from a certain perspective, the PAT scheme may be perceived as a pretext for poorly performing consumers to continue to operate without implementing efficiency measures. Are there means to avoid this in the PAT?
I'm sorry, I did not understand the question. Is an incentive to operate?
From a certain perspective, the PAT scheme may be perceived as a pretext for poorly performing consumers to continue to operate without implementing energy efficiency measures. Are there any means to avoid this in the PAT?
Oh, so you're saying that there's an incentive. Basically, if you're falling within your target group, then you can stay there and not outperform that, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure here either exactly what is referred to. And of course, if you are buying your way out with excess permits from the trading platform, of course you can continue operating without investment, I guess.
Yes, right now that's a loophole. That is a loophole which one can take advantage of in terms of measures. And I am not aware right now of any measures, any countermeasures being contemplated within PAT for this.
But it doesn't work like the EU ETS with allocation of emission allowances, right? Or energy consumption allowances. It is actually reductions in energy consumption that you need to document.
Yes, you need to document, but if you're not able to document as this particular audience has pointed out, then the way out is purchasing e-certs. That is a way out. Now, what can happen is, what could limit right now is whether you have enough e-certs to purchase or not, because
that's I guess what, when there are no credits in the system unless other companies have invested beyond their requirement.
Yes. So then it becomes a problem, and also there's a lag between when this particular scheme, when a particular cycle closes, and its credits can be purchased by those who are lagging in performance.
Right. What role can agencies like the BEE play in eradicating the issues related to M&V linked payments in ESCO models? How about a central agency in India to verify the sayings?
That has been contemplated, a simplified system, and in fact, ESL tried it, deploying smart meters and using smart meters as a simplified M&V system for retrofits, especially in buildings and others, but it has not worked so far. So yes, a central agency would definitely help. It could simplify measurement and verification, especially simplify the instruments, or actually prescribe the instruments and the complexity of the system that can be used in M&V. That would also help. And also, what has been a challenge is, in absence of all of this, people are using deemed savings. That is further eroding the confidence of potential consumers, because deemed savings are all not accurate for a lot of the time. So in that sense, a centralized agency or a much more simpler system of measurement and verification that can be used by a large majority of customers, and not just by a small bunch who have the resources or who understand efficiency to the extent that they would want to go the whole call. That is definitely needed.
Okay. How do you see the impact of lower renewable power prices on energy efficiency demand?
It is kind of a negative impact. The renewables market in India has moved at a much faster pace, and the grid parity has been achieved. So yes, that's kind of killing the efficiency market right now, and thus there's even a greater need in India for mandatory energy efficiency policies for other sectors, other than industrial.
So you don't see it as having significant impact?
No, I said there's a significant impact. I won't count it as significant. I cannot quantify it as significant and non-significant, but yes, people now have this recourse that, of course, it's clean energy, so we can use as much as we want to if we are willing to pay for it. The solar is the buzzword and has been for some years, at least for the last 10 years. And people are using that as a pretext to stay away from energy efficiency. So in that sense, there has been a negative impact on energy efficiency because of a greater penetration of renewable energy in India.
Okay. Another related question here: the subsidized power and GST appear to be a barrier for ESCO business. What are your views on that? I'm not sure everybody knows what GST is.
I can comment on the first one. Is basically the subsidized power. It runs both ways. For industries, there are no subsidies. So industries are the most heavily, they have the heaviest tariffs for electricity in India. So to that extent, they want to adopt energy efficiency only for that. But then also, it's a catch-22 situation, but they are also the biggest revenue generators for all the utilities. And all the utilities, at least the public sector utilities, which are about 90 to 95%, they are debt-ridden. And this is their cash cow, basically, the industrial sector. So while in this sector, the subsidies don't work and the consumer would like to, in all of this sector, especially agriculture and buildings, the subsidies do discourage energy efficiency. And going to the previous question, there are also in agriculture sector, there's a lot of, there are a decent number of schemes which are looking at using renewable energy instead of thinking of energy efficiency. Because the government, no government, whether at the state level or at the central level, is going to risk eliminating the agriculture sector, because that's a big, there are political issues around it. So in that sense, the subsidies in agriculture sector and domestic sector to discourage ESCOs.
Okay. Which of the presented schemes would you say have been the most successful in terms of overall total energy efficiency achievements? and which have been the most successful in maximizing energy efficiency savings per type of intervention, beyond cherry picking, it says here.
Is this limited to ESCO, this policies and schemes, or is this specific to ESCO? Because if you're looking beyond ESCOs, then I would say in India, one of the most successful schemes for energy efficiency has been its star labeling program for appliances. But then ESCOs have no role there. And if you're looking within the ESCO model, then I would say the PAT scheme, with whatever drawbacks it has been able to achieve something. And with proper implementation and improvements in design, it can work.
All right. Here's a question saying the way I see the EESL is that it identifies projects and directs them to other ESCOs. Is it ensured that smaller ESCOs get their share of projects, and does the EESL provide them with guarantees to alleviate their financing hurdles?
So that's not exactly true. Not all of the work that ESL has done has been through ESCOs. It has been through vendors, but those vendors may or may not be ESCOs all the time. That said, there have been efforts within ESL that I've experienced while working with them. They have tried to finance in the sense that they are procuring the technology, they are paying for it, and the ESCO only has to go and apply it in the client's project or site, and they get a project management fee for that. So that is the kind of financing which has been available so far, to the extent it is available to ESCOs or any other vendors. But there have been attempts to impanel ESCOs and ESCOs for larger projects where much more financing is needed. So, for example, a chiller energy efficiency replacement program was under consideration, where large-scale chiller plant retrofits would be designed and implemented by ESCOs, and the financing will come through ESL. But that has not taken off so far, and also there was something on resilient buildings along the same lines. There are complexities within it, but it is not that only ESCOs get the projects from ESL. Quite a lot of them are simply vendors who go and install the technology that is under the purview.
Okay, here's a request for your views on statement here that ESCOs as independent service providers are getting blurred in India as more and more supplies-oriented, sort of deemed savings measures are being promoted. I'm not exactly sure what's referred to, but you might know that.
Could you repeat that? I missed some part of that statement.
Okay. ESCOs as independent service providers are getting blurred in India as more and more supplies-oriented deemed savings measures are being promoted. What are your views on that?
Yes, I kind of agree with that. That the deemed savings model has further diminished the scope for actual M&D in projects, and further narrowed the margins for this, especially for the smaller ones. So, case example is that even ESCOs such as Carrier or Daikin, who are operating as vendor ESCOs in India, they also do not finance the product or the technology itself. They primarily do the servicing and the management of the facility. So that kind of gives you a picture of that the larger multinational ESCOs are not actually into financing, and they are not using these savings. So yes, deemed savings and the push on deemed saving has to some extent damaged. Yes.
All right. So you agree on that point. I have a last question, and it fits also with our time. It's actually almost up. And a question which is a bit like another question I think you've answered before. A global trend we are seeing now involves combining energy efficiency and renewable energy projects to secure funding. Is this trend present in India, and do Indian ESCOs provide this mix of EE and RE solutions?
Yes, there have been examples. As I mentioned earlier, Schneider is trying to do that. It already had a decent market share within the ESCO sector for energy efficiency solutions, and it has, to the best of my knowledge, recently started a subsidiary which is looking at energy as a service. So it's both looking at the renewable side of it, as in, generating the energy and mostly on site if possible, and then topping it up with energy efficiency measures, or the other way around. There are also other projects, and this has been tried even in a mall in, I think, Odisha or somewhere, where the provider did both the renewables on the top and applied energy efficient cooling systems, and then whatever was the balance was of course taken through the
Okay, I have no more questions on my list, but I can add to that last point that you're responding to here, Aarti, that we are in fact also here at the Global ESCO Network considering or planning to have another webinar later in the year, focusing exactly on this expansion of the scope of ESCO operation, which is not only energy efficiency in the future, but also a combination of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and maybe also EV charging. So we will be looking into that trend and that increasing demand from clients in this sphere. Time is up. So what remains for me is, first of all, to thank you, Aarti, for your presentation and your valuable answers to all the questions that we received. So thank you also to our audience for the questions. It's been most enlightening to have your views also presented here at our webinar. Please stay tuned on our website or check your mailbox. We are writing out to all of you, not only with a message when the recording of this webinar is available on our website, but also when we are coming up with further webinars in the future. So thank you very much for presentation, audience, participation. Looking forward to see you next time.